Skyrim has been out for over 10 years now, and there have been many memories we've all had throughout different playthroughs. One thing I will never forget is the first time I entered Whiterun's walls and was blown away by its design. Cities in Skyrim have a certain way to do that for the player and really immerse you into the world of the Elder Scrolls. And what is up guys, Ange from the Denmen here, and today I thought it would be a good idea to do a tier list of every city in the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim. There are a couple of notes we need to go over before we start our list, beginning with how we will be grading them. Overall design, backstory, and characters is the criteria we will follow to grade each of the cities on how good they actually are. All of them will vary on where they land in our tier list, but if you are excited, make sure you hit that like button and comment which cities are your favorite in Skyrim. With that being said, we have a lot to go over today, so get comfy, grab that bottle of Blackbriar mead, and let's get right into the video. Kicking us off, we head to the most northwest part of Skyrim with the capital of the province. Solitude has a lot going for it, from location, layout, and so much more. The streets are designed in a way that makes it seem large and grand, but also easy enough to navigate around for newer players. The overall design of Solitude is where it really shines. It is nestled atop a mountain, and you can see the city overhead from well before you reach the city itself. It really feels like what a capital would be like, with it seeming well guarded, lavish, and maintained fairly well. There are tons of shops, homes, and one of the better taverns located within its walls, and even a large dock to fill out its perimeter. All of these unique places give Solitude a great style, so I'm gonna give it an S grade for design. Characters is where it gets a little tricky for me, because we see some good ones who are interesting, but most of them are quite boring and nothing really going on with them. There are a couple of note, like Sabil Stentor, with her being hinted at being a vampire, or Jarl Elisif herself, but many of them are easy to forget because they don't really lend any unique quests or have any secrets to uncover. For that, I'm going to have to give it a C, because it should definitely be a lot better than what we actually got. Our final criteria is backstory, and Solitude does an amazing job by giving us plenty of it. For starters, this is where the Empire leads its attacks against the Stormcloaks, and we see a lot of that with a large number of soldiers. We see both sides right away just as we enter the city, with an execution happening. Some are pleading to spare Rogvir, others want justice for his so-called help in letting Ulfric escape the city after he faced off against the High King himself. It goes even deeper, with the Wolf Queen being an important figure in the history of Solitude, with a dedicated questline to stop her. There is so much the player can uncover from conversations and quests, and that is why the backstory of Solitude is an A for me. If we put all of these together, the capital of Skyrim gets a rating of B, which is understandable seeing how it is one of the better cities out there. Moving on, just east of Solitude, we head into the swamps with our next city. Morthal doesn't really have much going on, with it being the capital of a hold. There are no walls to keep the people safe, guard towers, or anything of the sort. The actual city itself is pretty standard. There isn't really much of note, except for a small river dividing the two halves of Morthal. This does give it some diversity, but I'd say the overall design is pretty lackluster and gets a D in my opinion. The people of Morthal are quite interesting though, from those like Jarl Igrod, who are hinted at being psychic, and Phalion, who is disliked by the whole town. A lot of the residents have something buried underneath the surface that only true detectives would uncover, so I'm going to give them an A here. There isn't really much of note for backstory though. Morthal mostly keeps to themselves and distrusts outsiders. It is named after the great Edmoran hero Morehouse, but other than that, it is quite lackluster, so it deserves an F for backstory. Even though Morthal has some great characters, all of its other aspects are pretty bad, so that is why it is getting an overall rating of D. The next one up is very similar to Morthal, and sometimes can even be mistaken for it. Located along the Sea of Ghosts, Dawnstar is meant to be a bustling trade stop between the major cities of Solitude and Windhelm. Instead, we get a small village with one ship and not much else. There are a few shops, the Museum of the Mythic Dawn, and rival mines, but it is mostly pretty similar to its counterpart of Morthal. I will say that is a slight upgrade compared to Morthal, so I will give it a C in design. We do have a little more backstory here, but nothing really of note because it was a minor player in a lot of these events. The most important events they were a part of were the Imperial Simulacrum and an alliance with the City of Solitude. Even though an alliance between two cities is an interesting plotline, Bethesda didn't take this anywhere in Skyrim with no mention of it in the game. There isn't much to know about Dawnstar and it deserves the rating of D for backstory. Then we have the residents of Dawnstar and most of them are a mixed bag. There are some good ones like the two leaders of their respective mines. They tell an interesting story of partners who are separated because of rival mines. It goes as far as the possibility of Legelf hiring the Dark Brotherhood to assassinate his wife. Most of the people of Dawnstar aren't on this level of mystery and story though, and that is why they are getting a D in this area. Dawnstar is nothing really of note and it is pretty similar to Morthal, so with all of that being said, it is getting a D grade for me. Let's head south for a second to the first major city a lot of us will go to when we first enter the world of Skyrim. Whiterun is one of the best cities we have in the game. I love the design of it. The high walls and all of the buildings actually make it seem like an actual major settlement. It is one where the player will keep coming back to, and I love how it is designed after Edoras from the Lord of the Rings. It really has that cozy feeling to it, and when people think of cities, they think of Whiterun, so I'm going to give it an S for design. The people of Whiterun are all relatively unique as well. The feud between the Greymanes and Battleborns is interesting and lends to hidden romance and a questline to rescue one of the Greymanes. We also have Heimskir, who can be seen shouting about Talos, which brings life to the city. Even the companions are more than what they seem, being secretly werewolves. There is so much that the residents of Whiterun are involved in, and that is why I'm giving them an S grade. Lastly, we have the backstory, and it is some of the best we have seen in Skyrim. Having Whiterun tie heavily to the companions' backstory of Ysgramor and Atmora is amazing to say the least. The addition of having Dragon's Reach as a place that is meant to trap dragons is also quite interesting and gives a lot of story to the city itself. I think it's easy to say that Whiterun also gets an S rating for backstory, and with that, an overall rating of our first S for the whole of the city. Closer to the border of Cyrodiil, we have the little town of Falkreath. There isn't really much to the design of the city. You have your basics with a general store, sawmill, and Jarl's longhouse, but we do have a small wall guarding the border of Falkreath. Like most of the other smaller cities, it is pretty similar to its design, and that is why it gets a D rating. Unlike the smaller cities, there's actually a lot of backstory here, from the invasions of the orcs and withholding an attack from the savage Reachmen. In its prime, Falkreath was a mighty stronghold, but from the time we see it now, it is a shell of its former self. The backstory of Falkreath is quite unique and is tethered to a lot of other provinces and races, so that is why I am giving it a B. Finally are the residents of the sleepy town, and there isn't really much to say here. They are all mostly the same except for a few standouts like Jarl Siggeir taking the throne from his uncle. We also have the werewolf Sinding, who is quite a controversial character. Falkreath is pretty basic when it comes to its people, so in my opinion it deserves a C rating. When it comes to Falkreath, it is hard to pinpoint anything that it does extremely well, but also anything that it does really bad, so it is fitting that it gets an overall rating of C. Now this next one is probably one of, if not the best city in the entire game of Skyrim. I can't say enough how much I enjoy this one and all that it has to offer. Markarth is easily a top tier city, so let me explain why this is the case. I love the aesthetic that Markarth brings. The dwarven theme is next to none and gives an ancient city a modern feel to it all. The architecture for the homes inside and out is some of my favorite. Take a look at Understone Keep and you will know exactly what I mean when it comes to Markarth. It is a pretty easy decision. Markarth deserves a grade of S for design. The backstory surrounding the city is some of the best we have seen as well. It is tied to a lot of the province of Skyrim, but also to the overarching world of Tamriel. We see little tidbits of the Forsworn scattered throughout the Reach, and they tell a story of them trying to retake Markarth. Well, at one point in time, they did manage to accomplish this, and this is what led to the Bear of Markarth, or as a lot of you may know him as, Ulfric Stormcloak, becoming a legend in Skyrim. For that, I'm gonna have to give them an S tier as well, because the lore behind Markarth is next to none. Finally are the residents of the city, and we have a lot of interesting folk. There's a good mix, and you see this especially through the Forsworn conspiracy questline. A lot of the residents, like the Silverbloods, have an interesting tie to the city, and the fact that there are actual Forsworn here in Cidhna Mine is a neat touch, and they are all quite unique. The people of Markarth are really interesting to me and bring you into the world of the Elder Scrolls, so for that, I'm giving it an S. This is probably the best city in Skyrim, and for that, it deserves an overall rating of S. We're now a little past the halfway point, and now is a good time to comment what your favorite cities in Skyrim are, so make sure you drop a comment letting me know. Continuing on though, we move to the far north of the province with Winterhold. I'm just gonna say this outright, I don't like the design of Winterhold. If we add the college onto it, then it gets a little better, but just the city itself is pretty lackluster, and overall, one of the worst we have seen. I think it is a neat idea to have a collapsed city, but there is just not enough here that makes it a good city, so it gets an F for me. The backstory of Winterhold is shrouded in a lot of mystery, and many people who play Skyrim will know of it. The collapse that led to where it is in present is still talked about to this day, and many have their own theories on how it happened, from the eruption of Red Mountain to the college itself playing a major role in it. This led a lot of the residents to be wary of the mages just past the city and could have some neat story points. Overall, the backstory of Winterhold is pretty good, but not played out well enough that it can be a top tier, so I'm gonna have to give it a C. Lastly, we have the people of Winterhold, and again, there isn't really much to talk about here. A lot of them are pretty forgettable because most of the unique ones reside in the college, so for that, it gets an F for me here as well. That brings us to an overall rating of F, and honestly, it had a lot of missed opportunities which could have made the city much better, but instead, we got a run-down Winterhold. The next one up picks up a lot of the slack in my opinion. Just along Lake Honrick is the fishing city of Riften. I love the idea of a town on the water with canals and docks scattered around. Riften itself has a unique theme to it. We see layers to the city with the more decorated areas and lavish homes, but there are also the slums by the water and of course, the Ratway. All of these little things give the town of Riften a great design, and that is why it deserves an S. The lore behind the city is little and far between, with it not tied to a lot of the world. We do have the Thieves Guild headquarters here, which makes it a little better, but overall we don't see much from the lakeside town, so to me it gets a C. The residents here are what makes it so good though. There are a ton of people who are not what they seem and only here for the money, but we do have some decent folk like Miol the Lioness as well. We see a good mix of all kinds of people, and of course the members of the Thieves Guild just makes it that much better, so I'd have to give them an S rating. Riften does have its flaws, but it is still one of the best cities we see in Skyrim, and for that, it gets an overall rating of A. We have two more left, and our next one brings us to the home of the Stormcloaks. Windhelm is the oldest city in Skyrim and possibly even the oldest city of man in the entire continent. It has a rich history dating all the way back to the Merethic era, when Ysgramor himself founded it. Later on, it became the capital of the First Empire of Nords, which also include High Rock, Morrowind, and some of Cyrodiil. I'd say most of us have heard about the sacking of Windhelm, which led to the forming of the Ebonheart Pact. As you can see, Windhelm is tied to a lot of the lore, not just in Skyrim, but also Tamriel. So for that, I'm gonna have to give it an S. Its design is also quite unique. The city just feels old from the Stone Quarter all the way to where the Dunmer live in the Grey Quarter. There are some flaws though with it, at times seeming too bland. Compared to a place like Whiterun, it does not seem as lively, so I'm gonna have to give it a C in design. Finally, we have the characters, and we see an interesting dynamic in the city. There is a lot of hate for the Dark Elves amongst the Nords, which in turn makes the Dunmer dislike the Nords. Even further than that, we have the Butcher of Windhelm, also known as Calixto Quarium. We see a lot of different storylines play out in Windhelm, and the residents make it that much better, so it deserves a B rating here. Windhelm does have a lot going for it, but overall, it is one that not a lot of us will go to often, so an overall rating of B is in order for this city. Finally, we head to the island of Solstheim, to the small town of Raven Rock. I love the design of Raven Rock. It is very different from anything we see in Skyrim and gives a good diversity to cities. There is so much to do here and feels like a frontier city with a whole new world to explore. From all of the Dunmer homes to the Hull and the mines, there is so much going for Raven Rock, and that is why it deserves a rating of S for design. There isn't really much here in backstory, but we do see some tidbits here and there. It was founded in the Third Era and was almost entirely inhabited by Imperials and Nords. A lot of the history for the city came during the Blood Moon DLC from Morrowind, but ever since the eruption of Red Mountain, it became a mostly Dunmer settlement. We don't see a lot in the way of lore for Raven Rock, so for that, I'm gonna have to give it a D. The characters around the town is one of its strong points though. We see a wide range of people, from members of the Morag Tong, the brother to Delvin Mallory of the Thieves Guild, and House Whiterun. There are so many little details for a lot of the residents of Raven Rock, and they really bring the world to life, so for that, I'm gonna have to give them a rating of S. Overall, that comes out to a rating of A, which makes sense considering that Raven Rock is definitely one of the better ones in Skyrim. The cities in Skyrim vary greatly, and they are all good in a lot of different ways. Some are overall better than others, but I'm sure a lot of us out there can enjoy the cities for what they are. They are a mainstay for every Elder Scrolls game, and Skyrim is no different. I hope we see a renewed focus on cities in future titles, but for now, we will continue to delve into the cities that Skyrim has offered. But that is all for me now though, guys. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. Comment any videos you want to see in the future, and I'll see you all next time.